I haven't gotten that question since probably early 2024, and I'm glad someone's like talking about it again because I think people forgot about this point.
You wouldn't have Bitcoin if there was a kill switch, right? If there was a backdoor. But Bitcoin's done a lot of good. That's the way I would position this.
Do you have any ethical dilemmas or like moral like constraints to setting this thing that is just going to go do its thing?
I mean, dude, Truth Terminal OTCing 15 mil of Fartcoin, like that's an agent gone rogue. Like that's ridiculous. Welcome back to the Rollup, your home for technical talks and open conversations that shape the modular future. Nothing on today's show is to be construed as financial advice. You can see our full disclosures list at therollup.co/ventures. Sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode after a quick word from some of our awesome partners.
Imagine if the world's GDP moved on chain. Guys, say GM to SafeNet. The newest protocol by Safe isn't a blockchain and it's not a new layer 2. It's a transaction processing network built to send money anywhere and swap anything on thousands of layer 2s from a single universal balance in sub 500 milliseconds. It's fast, it's smooth, and it's simple. And it's built with safe multi-sig level security in mind. SafeNet unlocks smart accounts across multiple chains, allowing users to supercharge security, scalability, and speed. So get started today at net.safe.global and remember to follow @safe on X.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Rollup. Today we have an episode with our friends Saneel and Anish from Ritual, guys pioneering the crypto and AI space. I believe there's a lot of short-termism happening in this space, but I also believe that these guys aren't here for that. I think they're here for the long term, and we have a lot of ideas to talk about today that I think will be put into practice in the coming weeks to months. So Saneel, Anish, welcome, guys. Thanks for being here. Let's think long term today.
Yeah. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, I think part
Awesome.
of what I didn't realize early on, and like what helps kind of combat the short termism is learning that a lot of the builders in the crypto AI convergence space have actually been building for much longer than we've just started to see some of these things come on. So maybe you guys could talk about when you guys started building, and then ultimately what led you, and what was your previous experience, what led you to building Ritual?
Yeah. At least for Ritual, Ritual started, I think, what is it, June 2023, right? So wow, it feels like yesterday and also like 5 years ago. It's crazy that I'm saying it out loud. But I think that really started because right after, I mean, a lot of the team had been sort of keenly aware of this intersection before. A few of us used to work at a couple of funds in the space, right, where we were investing actively. One of those funds was a very early investor in like, Numerai and BitTensor and Polymarket. So this idea of like sort of harnessing incentives to collectivize intelligence was always sort of at the forefront, right? And I'll throw Allura in there as another company that they were very early on, and these were investments that were made in 2020, far before this was in the limelight. But two very interesting things I think happened around the time of like the FTX collapse, right? Which was the release of OpenAI, ChatGPT, and a lot more low key. But that was also the time where we maybe saw verifiable inference start hitting a sort of inflection point in terms of like people being more keenly aware. Part of that mainly because liquid market was over, so we had to actually go back to the research, and part of that being because it actually advanced there.
And
I think those were two trends.
And verifiable inference is a pretty core component of this entire space. So maybe you could break that down. What is verifiable inference?
Yeah, quite simply, and I'll let Nish maybe chime in because I think I'll have a more nuanced take than me. But quite simply, the ability to prove that input X with model Y led to output Z, right? And I think that is important in different contexts. I think historically, people have talked about it enhancing security within the context of crypto. Verifiable inference is probably important. It's important to Ritual, but probably for reasons that are a little bit more non-obvious, right, than the typical ones that you'll see outside. And maybe I'll let Anish take over and chat a little bit more about that.
Yeah, in the Web 2 world, today, if you go to like chatgpt.com and you give it a prompt, you say, hey, I'm recording a Rollup podcast with Saneel and Anish. Can you spit out some questions for this Crypto AI seminar? And you hit, I'm using GPT 4.0. You don't actually know whether or not it's GPT 4.0, whether you're getting, upselled to a better model, whether you're getting shorted with a cheaper model. And for all of these centralized providers, it's kind of incentivized for them. It's better for them if they sell you a better model and in the back end use a cheaper model to do some inference. The idea behind verifiable inference is basically you are actually getting what you paid for. Right? It's if I'm selecting GPT-4o, that is in fact the model that's being run, and I have like a succinct proof that says, "Hey, here's the input you gave me. This is exactly the output that I ran. Here's the computation, and here's the output." And it becomes especially important when you sort of blow up from ChatGPT to more like actual applications that are moving money around, where it gets really important to make sure that the inference that's being done is actually exactly what you want and not something that a centralized provider is picking and choosing the outputs for.
Yeah, super helpful. And I think I think we can certainly further outline the problem here, right? Which is there's a lot of centralizing forces in the AI market that is leading towards a divergent future, I believe. And we'll get into that a bit more. But for our audience who comes from technical researchers, founders, BDers, sophisticated, investors, VCs, et cetera, right? When we're thinking about this entire convergence more broadly, Anish and Saneel, what's the story here? Like, how did we go from the ideation of, as you spoke about, Saneel, several years ago, funding, different venture investments and builders, to now we have different sectors even of this AI sector. Now we've got AI agents, and then there's like three different forms of agents. There's like autonomous, and there's like verifiable, and so like there's sovereign agents, and there's just kind of like this hierarchy, and then there's like this DeFAI. Then there's kind of full sector has bloomed here, and forgive us for being too focused on like the fundamentals, but there's a lot that I think our audience needs to get caught up on. So maybe Saneel, you could tell us a bit about how this convergence started, where this convergence is really valuable, why you think it's important that these two go together, and maybe you speed run us a bit on kind of like what's happened so far and how these experiments have played out.
Yeah, it's a good question. Let's see, maybe where this started. Yeah, I think, like I said, like going back to sort of, also as it ties into when I was explaining like Rachel's journey is like that time period right after the FTX collapse, right, with the release of OpenAI, I think catalyzes this new interest, right? Because the fact that on one hand you had ChatGPT launched, and on the other hand you had this verifiable inference. This was like in the fall, right? People were, I think, very early people were like looking at this, but I think everyone in crypto was pretty upset over what happened. So maybe not as many people were paying attention to it. And that maybe what the inflection point that changed was when we started Ritual in that following summer 2023. We actually spent a lot of time like thinking and talking to a lot of the early crypto AI folks. And back then it was still very much indexed on verifiable inference, right? There were some people doing decentralized training, etc. The current meta though looks very, very different, right? The current meta, obviously, as you mentioned, there's a large number of liquid assets out in the market, right? That are like AI agents with coins attached. So I'll get into that in a sec. But broadly, speedrunning the evolution, first we saw people very keenly interested in the actual pure cryptographic applications to model inference, to which the blockchain was a useful layer on which those proofs could be settled, right, as a trustless layer on which they could be arbitered. Then the second wave, I'd argue, sort of was this early wave of GPU networks, right, that came around and were like promising decentralized inference. And I think we really saw a big wave of those last spring, like early in 2024, towards the end of 2023. Around that time, though, I think at Ritual, we were already realizing that the ability to exploit models on chain as product features was something that was going to become interesting, right? Because while I think everyone was looking at like what are interesting liquid narratives we can chase, as crypto always will, right? We were starting to already think about like where can this actually be used to build net new protocols. So around that time, we actually released FriendRug, which to my knowledge is like the first AI on-chain agent. Anish, maybe you can like speak a little bit more to like how that actually worked.
Yeah. So the core thesis has always been, at least for like a Web 2 audience, that AI has existed in the Web 2 world for the last 30 years. Right? If you're going to go out to a bank and get a loan, they already run credit risk models and different types of ML models to determine whether or not you are a satisfactory lender, and that doesn't exist in the crypto world today, right? Whether that's because of our constrained VM environments, whether that's the restrictions of what you can do on a blockchain, to date, it's kind of just been simple, like over collateralized lending, for example. FriendRug was, I think, the first AI agent that was built on chain. This is probably November 2023. Correct me if I'm wrong,
Yeah.
Saneel. And the
I
idea
think
there
December.
was, yeah, November,
I think
December,
December.
somewhere around there.
Yeah.
And the idea was, can we sort of enshrine this autonomous entity that sort of wakes up? Initially, it was connected to a friend rug chat room, and the whole idea was like a Persian rug dealer where you have to convince it. We loaded it up with like $40,000, and people were just chatting with this bot, trying to convince it to like buy and sell their keys so they could make money. And that was really exciting then because it was like a smart contract, a couple hundred lines of code that was deployed on base, running entirely by itself, spitting out to an LLM that said, "Hey, this is a message that I just got. Should I buy this person's key or should I not?" And we were early to a couple of ideas then as well, where it's like we didn't just take one LLM. We had three sort of council of LLMs sitting together, dictating, yes, no, yes, taking sort of the average of the responses. So it was harder to game. Coming on chain and then actually having like an on chain action that people could see, like, okay, this is the input message I sent. And here's like the buy, sell, or do nothing response that came out of it. And if there was a buy or sell, like an actual key was transferred in that transaction where they could see like the exchange happening on chain. And we thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and I
That
think
is very cool. Real quick, it's about verifiability here is the consistent trend here, Anish, and I think that's kind of the explanation about the agent. But yeah, Saneel, I know that you also have some thoughts about the evolution of the agents too. So curious to hear.
So anyway, the point of mentioning that was sort of like, I think that in crypto there's maybe the point, and this is actually also the case in AI. So I'm not saying this is a crypto phenomenon where things maybe happen, but maybe until like market forces converge on a certain narrative, right? It takes a while for people to wake up to that. So I know that when we did that, maybe a few months later, there were other few people that were thinking about sort of like on-chain AI, et cetera, right? For what it's worth, I think Virtuals was already doing what they were doing, in March 2024 when they had pivoted from a gaming protocol, right? And so, we were talking to the early set of folks that were doing that because, the technology that we had built to power FriendRug, we realized could be applied much more generally. And I think around maybe last summer, we realized that now there was going to be like an increasing need for functional agents, right? This is also around the time where we started really being a lot more public with Ritual's broader vision for an L1 and the ability to actually enshrine models on chain to allow for any model to like take actions on chain. But in order to sort of like prelude that, to your point about DeFAI, we started seeing that like, okay, maybe people would want to do this. And I think the only people maybe talking about this back then, some people were talking about it. The only people that were trying to push for product, funny enough, I think were some like the Telegram trading bots actually, because it's actually closest to what they were doing.
Those
So
were
if you
like
go
the
back,
bull market or the bear market. Like this is the future. This is what
exactly,
we have as cycle. It's like this cycle's DeFi. It was like no,
this is this
bro.
cycle's DeFi,
Banana gun
exactly.
is not this cycle's innovation, bro. I'm sorry.
Banana Gun was sadly not the cycle's thing. Much respect to their team, but I still, there's still a lot of trading bots that are out there and kicking, right? Like Bonk and stuff that are thinking about this. And so I think maybe like August 2024, we had a program called Alter that was under the Labs entity. There's now a similar program at the foundation called Shrine that functions the same. But under Alter, there was a prototype release that we do actually have a team working on an extended version for a framework, a multi-agent framework to take transactions on chain, not just swaps and sends, but staking, lends, recursive borrows. You could bake in strategies. Again, this was a few months before it caught on, like in DeFAI, which really only happened in December. So maybe we mistimed it a little bit. But I think, again, it shows that like there's a lot of very interesting innovation happening in crypto and AI, and maybe the market catches on a little bit later. Obviously, having a liquid proxy is nice for people to speculate on.
Yeah,
But for
exactly.
long
I was
term,
gonna say, you guys were
yeah,
early. The timing was right. It's just there was no
yeah,
token to ape, so nobody gave a shit. That's
right,
literally
right,
like the reality. But
right.
okay, so now we have, and you mentioned you have, so you guys developed an early agent on, early on, also a framework more recently, and
Yep,
now we have frameworks that are popular.
yep.
Eliza is one of like the big ones. There's AI Rig Complex, some of these other kind of like more liquid tokens with frameworks, and people are building, and then people are using these frameworks to then go build agents.
Yes.
Like what's like the connection here? How does it kind of work? And what's been your broad like thoughts around the technology that you've seen so far? And again, I don't mean to call out like short termism because I don't believe you guys are here for the short term. But I do believe, and a kind of a mentor and a good smart guy in the space said that this sector has the largest TAM for grifting this cycle. And I feel like we've seen that already, and we will continue to. And again, this is not about Ritual or about you guys, but like frameworks, agents, DeFi AI. Where are we at now? What are some things that have caught your eye that have been interesting? And what are some of like the basic foundational understanding points to really get a grasp as to where the space is now?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I'll give maybe my take, and then Anish, I think you'll have also a pretty good take. So, as someone who spent some studying this and been an active liquid participant in many of these things, I think that at the end of the day, if you want to map, let's start the market side, and then we can go to the product side. If you want to map how crypto AI has evolved in the market, right? Because I think that's very important to talk about in the context of a liquid cycle, and especially under the current regime. We started with an inflow of capital into GPUs, right? Then in that, a lot of that capital into like deep in networks and stuff like that. A lot of that capital then went to Tau, and then a lot of that capital flowed to agents, right? What has become increasingly clear is that when you look at the broad world of assets out there, there's actually not a lot of liquid proxies for AI that you can buy, right? If you go outside of crypto, you are pretty much limited to a number of chip manufacturers and existing large tech companies that do not give you the direct access that you want, that the direct exposure that you want. To that end, and especially for the retail base, right? Gives a much more what I call plausible like utility to these things by saying like, here's an agent and here's a coin, right? Um, I think that the agent frameworks are interesting experiments and emblematic, funny enough, of crypto, in spite of like the number of them that have been launched, of interesting ways to monetize open source software. I think like ultimately one of the things crypto is good at is finding ways to monetize open source software, building a framework that no matter how primitive that people may want to use because there's the right market conditions to go and make money off of this, right? Maybe not in the same direct ways, I think is fine, right? I also think that it's by creating these liquid proxies, it's actually pushed some of these teams to really go and one, like constantly evolve their frameworks, and two, like we've seen, it's sort of like with any infrastructure like foundation model. It's like, okay, someone did the framework for Python, then you have a guy that comes on and be like, I'm going to do it better. I'm going to do this for Rust, right? As in Spark, I'm going to do it for TypeScript. And so maybe it also leads to the downstream effect of like having more optionality for developers, right? Now, in terms of where it's going and why I think we saw capital rotation to like the DeFAI coins, people are probably pretty tired of agents to just yap, right? At the end of the day, like you can only sustain a liquid narrative for so long, and DeFi provides an even bigger plausible utility over like things. Now, do many of the DeFi stuff work? Some of them, not really, right? But the idea that at least it's not an agent that yaps, an agent that can actually go structure transactions on chain for you, no matter how primitive, is plausible utility. And where do I think the puck is going is that having liquid proxies for agents is great. Having liquid proxies for agents that could possibly do something for you on chain is great. Having agents that are embedded as product features into protocols, which we can talk about many examples of this because these exist on Ritual in our ecosystem, even though we've been a little bit quiet, is the next step because you do want agents that actually have real utility. Agents that are front end, I think fantastic. I actually really like the DeFi stuff, maybe more than anything else that came personally, but the fact is that there's a huge design surface, and Anish alluded to this earlier about integrating agents or agents that wrap around other models, right? There's been a bunch of like FinLLMs, right, for example, that could apply to DeFi, agents that coordinate between different models to plug into protocols. Not only are you delivering value from that agent to the actual function of that protocol, if you want to go tokenize it, sure, right? And like a good example of this is that like there's already been some very preliminary work into agents that wrap around like much more simple like Gark or like log vol prediction models or simpler models and coordinate between the two to automatically parameterize DeFi protocols. And we have a very talented team working on that, which I can talk about next. But now I'll shut up and let Anish say his piece.
Yeah, there's a couple of things there real quick, Anish. One is AI XBT got called out yesterday for spitting out slop. It said that Trump's World Liberty Finance bought 80,000 Ethereum tokens in the last like small time frame, arbitrary like 7-8 hours, but it was literally like over the course of its entire existence or something. And this tweet went viral, and I commented on it. I was like, "LMFAO, bro, you're hallucinating." And then the agent commented back and was like, I think he was like, nah, man, check the numbers or something. And I was like, bro, go talk to your robot parents. And so that's one thing that we've seen. And I think there is a market fatigue there. And Robbie and I had a great podcast with Hasib, who also expressed this fatigue. He also expressed that there would be some really trippy things happening where in the future, agents will try to act like humans. Humans may try to act like agents. There's going to be a push to genuine humanity and a return to the mean, if you will, of wanting to support human creators. And then the second thing here is more around this idea that I think is alluring to a lot of people. And so it's good to hear, Saneel, where you think this is headed, is that this idea of like, oh, instead of, picking up a ledger and transacting on chain all the time, I can allocate some capital to a hot wallet, and I can have this agent assistant manage my portfolio for me from my iPhone, from a natural language model. And so that is very, very alluring. And I think that is why, Sunil, you're also kind of excited about this DeFAI thing, because it's like, well, on-chain assistance sounds like a really, really big breakthrough. And that has also broken my mental model for things like intents and things like chain abstraction, because I think we're building too much for a human future and not enough for an agentic future. I know you guys have that covered. So, Anish, what are your thoughts? Where is this framework agent assistant kind of meta and trend and overall sector headed? What is the next step? What in your mind has actually stood out from the tech perspective so far?
Yeah, happy to chat the tech. So over the last couple months, we've been tracking probably like 100 different agent frameworks, and we've tried all of them to get really hands-on with figuring out like what can you actually do. I think part of the fatigue in the market comes from the fact that every single framework is built to do kind of the same stuff, right? It's like you've got an agent, it has a token, it sends tweets, and maybe it's got like a wallet that's got 100K of tokens, other AI agent tokens that it can buy and sell. So part of the limitation is just that all of these frameworks have been overfit to what sort of works today. And they haven't sort of thought of, how can this work beyond? But I don't even blame the frameworks for what it's worth. It's much more just the chains themselves, like you mentioned, are limited in what an agent can do, right? If you're on Ethereum today, it's prohibitively expensive to even do advanced automation. And most of these frameworks are running sort of off-chain Web2 servers that wake up, running a for loop, read some Twitter API content, and then go make a Uniswap transaction and directly from sort of like a centralized server. So to that extent, I'm sure you saw like the Truth Terminal a couple of weeks ago was sort of being called out for making trades that the bot wasn't making itself. And people were like, hey, is this a bot? Is this a human running this account? And that frankly, the real life agent scenario today is mostly that, right? It's you've got sort of an agent and you've got someone sitting behind that's sort of puppeteering the trades that are happening and point and clicking on deck screener.
We call those the Wizard of Oz agents.
Yeah, exactly. It just happens to be that 99% of agents today are the Wizard of Oz agents. I could speak to, at Ritual, we're sort of building at a fundamental layer for agents, thinking of not just users using the chain, but agents themselves. And so to that extent, it's like we're compatible with all of these frameworks, but we're sort of giving them the guardrails underneath to build some of the cool things so that these frameworks can start to think, 6 months, a year ahead in terms of what cool things agents can do. So we've got like scheduled transactions, right? Agents can just wake up by themselves and take actions. We've got enshrined inference. So it's like you can literally have a one line call out to an LLM. There's no need for like a Web2 server to orchestrate any of this. You can read and write to any chain directly from Ritual. So one of the problems with agents is you have to manage a wallet on Solana, on Base, on Ethereum mainnet, on other chains where you want to buy and sell tokens. We're kind of abstracting that out to like Ritual is the truth, the source of truth. You can dictate, I want to trade on Solana, I want to trade on Base, and we'll manage everything else from there, right? You don't have to worry about where I'm getting the RPC URL or how I'm dealing with, trying to get a transaction to Solana during high gas prices. And we'll sort of handle all of that out of the box. And so the thesis there for us is if we sort of build better underlying tooling to make it easier for people to do these things, then one step on top of that, the frameworks can start to build some really cool stuff in terms of what agents can do. And we can get less of the Wizard of Oz agents and more sort of creativity in terms of, what agents are doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's important to make distinction. There's also a step up, which is autonomous agents. If I'm, please correct me, which is like the developers can still mess around with the code, but there's a certain level of it's in the wild. It may or may not be able to be turned off, and it may or may not be able to have changes, but there's less developer access compared to like this Wizard of Oz. And then you got like fully sovereign, which is like, from my understanding, you press go and it's gone. You may be able to change a little bit of the parameters, but there's no turning it off. There's no adjusting its wallets. There's no changing its. If it wants to say something on Yap on Twitter, it's going to yap it. You better hope it's not racist, sexist, or politically incorrect. And so that's why I think a lot of these companies have more of like level 2 or 1 agents right now. And side note, guys, wait, first of all, is that correct? Is that like a decent way to think about it, or how yeah?
Yeah, that's spot on. Although I'd say most agents today are sort of in the level 1. Our goal is to get to sort of the level 3 where it's you can just let them go wild. It's like a contract on chain. And if you want for that agent to never be modifiable, kind of like enshrined forever, go to go, yeah, you could do that on chain.
Do you have any?
Most they are level 0.5 actually.
Yeah, like almost level 0. Like the dev's just gonna edit the tweet real quick.
Yeah.
Do you have any ethical dilemmas or like moral like constraints to setting this thing that is just going to go do its thing?
Coming out of left field, Rob.
That's a pretty valid question considering we're going to
very valid question. The reason I looked up is
entirely
actually
autonomous agents.
I haven't gotten that question since probably early 2024, and I'm glad someone's like talking about it again, because I think people forgot about this point after we had a bunch of coins in the market. Look, my answer to this is probably reflective personally, right? And maybe not speaking for Ritual, but of any builder in crypto, when you by nature build open and permissionless open source technologies, people are going to do stuff with it, right? People are going to do, good stuff with it. People are going to do bad stuff with it, right? The reality is that like the same argument maybe could be applied to just all of crypto as a whole, right? Like, are you worried that people are going to use this for money laundering? Like, sure, yeah, they do, right? Is that a minuscule portion of all the good or interesting things that people have done? Interesting being categorized as maybe not necessarily like purely altruistic, but like things that people enjoy. I think so, right? At the end of the day, we are building Ritual as infrastructure for people to go make all of these things that we're talking about a reality. Agents that are actually functional on chain, being able to write an agent within a smart contract, being able to write protocols that directly call out models, right? Being able to have, as you said, autonomous and sovereign agents, which these days is largely based on TE setups. Ritual is TE compatible, right? These are all things that we want to enable. What people go and do on them, right? Us being maybe like a source of filtration or a source of censorship, I think would underline a lot of trust in the network. And the whole point of this is that the network is like, once it's out there, there's validators running it, there's incentive for people running it, it's there. What people do on it, right? Being forced to be compliant with any sort of way, like that is a much bigger coordination problem, not frankly one that Ritual has control over. So am I worried about it? Like, will it happen? Maybe, right? For what it's worth, I think it could have already happened already. For what it's worth, I think there's a number of very, as you would say, politically incorrect agents that exist on Twitter with coins.
Truth Terminal OTCing 15 mil of Fartcoin, like that's an agent gone rogue. Like that's ridiculous.
I've definitely seen a bunch of coins that are just like hyper racist AI agents. That,
and I've got like this roast me 9,000 guy. I had blocked him, and the dev is like DMing me, please unblock this guy, or else it's gonna break my Twitter algo. I'm like, dude, this guy's screaming bullshit at me. Like, get out of here. It's like I don't need that in my mind. I don't care if it comes from an LLM. Like, I don't need to be told that like I'm an absolute retard. Excuse my language, and that I'm worth nothing. Like, dude, who created this thing? Like, they try to make people commit suicide. So look, I think it's a valid question, Rob. And I think that was a good answer. Yeah, feel free to add more there. Yeah.
No, if you build open permissionless things, people are going to do shit, right? Like people do shit on the internet all the time. But I think the arc of history, whether it's the internet or crypto or anything else, shows that when you actually do give most forms of technology to the people, usually the good or the interesting eclipses the bad by several orders of magnitude, usually. So
I like the optimism, and I tend to agree. And that's, I think, how good investors think in the world as well, right? Is like you see a trend, there's clearly going to be, and again, it comes back to the short-termism that I started this with, comes back to this divergent path that I feel like we're racing to, we're accelerating. We are literally accelerating. Don't buy AI Accelerate though, but that's a whole different story. But we're accelerating towards this like divergent like split where, there's positive and negative. And I think we can get into the philosophicals, but Anish, I'd like to hear your perspective. And don't worry, Rob is going to bring us back into the philosophical all day long. So I'd like to hear your perspective about this, the actual chain and the tech. We are big fans of purpose-built chains on this pod. We are non-believers, excluding several high TPS execution environments, chains, which will not be named, that we have invested in before our thesis changed. Excluding some of these, we tend to believe that the best use cases for crypto are going to consistently be built on chains which are customized and built with a purpose-built manner before they were built. I do not believe you're going to go to an a la carte menu and be forced to eat this dinner. Where is this? If you can go to a buffet, pick what you want. And I do not believe the a la carte is going to get you a better product for your users, for your developers, for everybody. So Anish, maybe you can talk to us a bit about what is the difference between Ritual as an L1 versus like Solana, Sui, Avalanche, etc. And what is the actual consensus design differences? What is the execution differences? What is the storage differences? What is the data throughput of like? Talk to us about how Ritual is purpose built and why those decisions were made that way, if you can.
Yeah, I mean, your intro did half of the job for me, setting up sort of like a Michelin star tasting course for me to go down. The way I'd probably put it is modern blockchains thus far have sort of just been focused on how do we improve performance, right? It's like we have users today. Users want to trade meme coins. Users want to open positions on lending protocols. How can we take that from being 10 transactions per second to 10,000 transactions per second? The idea behind Ritual is a little different. We're not focused on hyperscaling the use cases that exist today, but more so just double clicking on like what are people going to do 2 years from today, right? If are you going to have these agents running autonomously? Are you going to have AI enabled lending protocols? And how can we build infrastructure for them? And so to that extent, for what it's worth, we started with a general purpose approach. We built a Oracle network called Infernet, a framework, Infernet SDK. It's like the sixth most popular contract on Base, had 10 million transactions last year. And what we learned from that is that you need to have purpose-built architecture to really enable net new use cases, right? It's really not possible just on a general purpose chain to make that happen. So to that extent, Ritual is a EVM compatible L1 chain. And so for developers that are coming in from Ethereum, who are coming in from Base, other EVM networks, it's very familiar. The idea is to make it super simple for them to change their smart contracts. It takes like one line of code to integrate AI compute, ZK, TEEs, all types of expressive compute. But in the back end, we've built like 10 different innovations, whether that's consensus. We rewrote a consensus protocol that we're calling Symphony. We have a new transaction fee mechanism called Resonance that helps price these things. We have new research into like probabilistic proof of machine learning with VTune. And all of this is hidden abstraction to the user, but purpose built in the chain to make those use cases possible. So it's really like, how do we make it as easy as possible for a user or developer to get on the chain, but to give them the most flexible and powerful toolkit that's purpose built for these sort of AI use cases. And I'm happy to dive into any one of these things.
Yeah, I mean, it's time to go. It's time to go full right curve here, Rob. Do you have a question about any of that word mumbo jumbo? Because I can go. So, all right, I'll take the first one. All right, so on the execution, you rewrote the consensus design specifically for Ritual. Why was that rewritten? And then how is it different in such a way that enables better use cases for agents?
Redstone is DeFi's modular oracle, supporting over 100 clients on over 50 chains and offering 1,000 assets. Redstone is the leader for Bitcoin staking and yield-bearing assets. They offer the most robust, customizable price feeds available in any model. Join the Redstone exhibition today.
I'll walk you through how the current status quo works today, right? You have Ethereum, you send a transaction on Ethereum, and the way that validators come to consensus is that every single validator is going to re-execute that transaction, right? So if you have 20,000 validators participating in Ethereum, all 20,000 are going to run these exact same operations in the exact same order and come to a conclusion that says, hey, I agree on this output, this works. Now, we've purposefully limited what you can do on Ethereum to sort of the common denominator of like very small residential validators to make sure that anyone can participate in the network. And that's what the consensus mechanism is designed for. The absolute downside there is you can only sort of do like, your add operations, your multiply, your division, very simple operations. With Ritual, we ran into a problem where, say you need to do an LLM inference, right? This is something that could take, it's resource intensive. It needs GPUs, it needs parallelism. You need to have high disk requirements, high memory requirements. And it's not necessary that every node in your ecosystem will want to re-execute that transaction, right? Imagine if it took a minute to run an LLM transaction. You don't want 20,000 nodes in your network to be redoing that LLM transaction. And that's only one, right? Imagine 100 LLM transactions. So fundamentally, we built this new consensus mechanism called Symphony, which is sort of built on this execute once, verify many times semantics. And that verification comes back in here again, which is we elect one validator that executes some compute and goes, here's my input, here's my output. It generates some proof of that execution that says, hey, this is, synced verification that I actually ran this compute. And rather than having the other, 19,999 validators re-execute that compute, we simply shard up that proof and get them to verify a very, very small portion that says, yeah, this operation looks correct to me. And the entire network then comes to consensus and says, yeah, rather than us doing it 20,000 times, each of us have verified a very small part of this being correct. And together we're confident that this is the correct operation. And that's sort of, fundamental and necessary when you start to get into like the really expressive types of compute in the virtual machine.
Very cool. It almost sounds similar to data availability sampling and light nodes in a kind of framework, right?
It's exactly that. It's built
Yeah.
very similarly modeled to that, where it's like in DAS, you can just have, once 99%, once you get a very few number of nodes that assert to correctness, you have a very high probability of the fact that it's correct. Same way
Yep.
here. Once you can verify that, 5 out of 100 of the shards are correct of the proof, you have almost like a 4 nines confidence that, hey, this works.
Yep. And I mean, the act of the redundancy of verifying consensus or coming to consensus for every single, like, I just imagine like a kid on like a natural language model, like on like Claude.ritual.ai or whatever, just smashing F enter, and then all the validators trying to like come to the consensus of this like 3-year-old just like on mommy's computer. Like that's just not going to work.
It's not that far away, right? It's AIXPT tweeting out 15 million Fartcoin OTC and 20,000 validators having to determine whether or not it meant to do that.
Okay, cool. Talk to us about some of the execution as well. So you mentioned about how we come to consensus. Part of the consensus question, and that is relevant, is like a lot of blockchains suffer from state bloat, right? Where there's so much data, there's so much happening on these high throughput chains that it's like we can store it in our state, in our chain for like up to like 10 days even sometimes, or even less. And then it's like, guys, we can't keep verifying all of this state over and over again. And it gets really bogged down. And then, you move to things like permanent storage blockchains. So like, what's your solution for state bloat, and what's your solution for fast execution, and how do they kind of tie together with consensus?
Sure, I can tackle them one at a time. State bloat. So for starters, maybe a contrarian opinion. I think state bloat is a little overblown, at least on EVM chains today. I think it was a problem a couple of years ago when the pace of hard drives and SSDs wasn't keeping up. I think today, and there's a memory shortage. Today, it's much cheaper. Ethereum grows maybe 500 gigabytes a year, which isn't an unreasonable size of state growth. To the extent that for Ritual, the problem is we have these objects that are very large, right? These AI models can be hundreds of gigabytes in size. And so that's not something you want to have stored in a blockchain node across the network. To that extent, we've sort of got classes of nodes. We integrate Web 2. So like if you want to pull a model from Hugging Face, that works today. We integrate Web 3. If you want to store your model on Arweave, on Filecoin, on IPFS, we tap into those as well. And the idea is we've just sort of built the plumbing necessary that regardless of where you store your model, you can still use that on Ritual. But we're not actually storing the model itself on Ritual. So that's kind of at least for us, the large object state growth property. Other than that, I mean, normal state growth I expect we'll continue to see like any other chain. There's no novel innovation there, but I think it's much less of a problem today than it was a couple of years ago. On the high performance aspect, candidly, we're not optimizing. We're not a. I wouldn't call us a high performance throughput chain, right? We're not the monads of the world. We're not the mega ETHs of the world. That's not what we're trying to innovate. And our opinion has just been we've built architecture that can be plugged and played into sort of net new EVM implementations. So if tomorrow Monad open sources its Monad VM and it happens to be the most powerful sort of parallel EVM implementation, we're happy to use their work and integrate our work on top of that to let us borrow those same capabilities. We're much more focused on how can we sort of make AI work on chain? How can we make these expressive compute work on chain? And much less how can we have a chain that's super fast for regular transactions.
One more thing I'll add there is that, like, to Anish's last point there, right? Like, hint, hint, tease, tease, right? You'll see something soon. But one thing that we've used as internal messaging is that Ritual is the most expressive L1 in existence, right? Very simply, like, for the viewers out there, if I were to condense like all of the insane work that like the labs team has done, like, I want there to be this one takeaway. Current blockchains are architected so that you have a bunch of people that are running the same computer. And we've done a lot of work on how do we get that to be, um, you know, uh, faster, right? As in the case of some of the examples Anish mentions, more parallelized, or even have sidecars, right? With like rollups, right? Ritual's whole goal and our whole expressive purpose, and what we realized very on when trying to build an L1 for AI, is that you need to try and build an architecture that works today for what's going to be popular in the future. So, whereas other chains continue, and as they should, on trying to make and scale that single shared world computer, we're focused on building a chain where you can have that, but can also have specialized compute types that are folded in. So, what does it look like for a chain to have not all the same nodes run the same computer, but still have all of the guarantees and user experience of a regular chain? Because when you have that, that means that maybe it's AI. I don't know. Maybe in like 10 years, it's like quantum or some shit like that, right? Whatever comes next, right, that goes beyond the confines of regular computer, we can make sure is natively accessible on Ritual Chain in a way that users are familiar with. And that's sort of the whole purpose of like Resonance and
Yep.
Symphony and all of these things, is that we're very purpose built for AI. That's going to be our first sort of segue, and that's what we're going to be
But not
spending
just
probably.
AI. Like humans can use it, and then it can adapt in the future
It can
as
adapt.
well.
So like,
Got
while
it.
we are very indexed on AI, why that's where a lot of our team's background is, and that's where we feel comfortable, and that's where a lot of our ecosystem protocols are exploiting the asymmetric properties. If you think about it at a high level, all of the tech that we needed to build to make sure that different AI models that run on different hardware could be accessed in the same blockchain environment, that really scales well to anything that's just like different compute that can run on different hardware that can be accessed in the blockchain environment, not just models, right? And I think, to your point about long-termism, we're here to make sure that like we have the best performing infrastructure for AI on chain. I know there's a lot of other infrastructure platforms that are really like interested in like tackling parts of like this AI narrative, right? Like maybe like AI IP or like putting
Yeah.
AI launch. Yeah.
Yes, Robin. I know you got something on the tech real quick, Sunil. While we're out of the weeds, you and I can actually hang out. We let these guys talk about the tech a bit. Um, um, uh, is Allura hyperbolic, ritual, even like story to an extent? Ionet, Mira. Like, can you also like, because there's an institutional AI sector and there's like the ones that are live right now. Let's just put it that way. There's like research coins and then there's like DeFi summer coins. And I've made this analogy in the past. So like, are you guys like competing with these, or are they helpful for you guys? Like, I don't know if you want to get into specifics, but like Allura ritual hyperbolic, Nillion, Mira, like some of these team story, like how, like, yeah, like what's the relation, or like what's the dynamic there with this next era of like AI tokens and AI
By the way,
mainnets and things?
of all the
Yeah.
companies you just mentioned, I think we're partnered with all but one. So it's like
Okay.
the real
Fantastic. That's
answer.
what I figured.
Yeah, the real answer is that Ritual exists as a superset of all of those when it comes to crypto AI. I'll start with Story as another comparable L1, right? Um, I think they're great. I think Jason talks a lot about AI agents, but they've been very clear that like at the end of the day, Story is an IP chain, right? They're concerned about AI IP, but they're not a chain that's specifically purpose built to handle models and agents actually running on chain. And we've spoken at length about this. So I think that they'll carve out their niche, and there's a lot of collaboration where like a lot of the actual like agentic activity and economic activity will happen maybe on Ritual, and a lot of that provenance, that IP, I'm not denying that they have built better primitives for that, right? Something like Allura is probably closer to a bit tensor, right? And they really want to fix this problem of like, how do you incentivize people to build better models? We think a lot about like, once you have those models, how can you modify them or use them into protocols? So if there's a model that's trained to optimize, the pool fees for an AMM on Allura, right? At the end of the day, they still need a protocol to go plug that in. They still need something to make that valuable. We can take that model and enshrine it, and they actually do have some ritual sidecars running. We're very close to their team. We got the same office that will, take that model from the Allura network and continuously update it and actually plug into to the ritual protocol. I'll keep going down the list, like Hyperbolic and IO. Like, we have partnered with IO. These companies are ultimately GPU clouds. There's no restrictions on where the compute that these like compute nodes that are offering these models can come from. If someone wants to come run one of those specialized nodes on Ritual using an IO GPU or an Aether GPU, or a hyperbolic GPU, they can. It's very easy, and like we've talked at length those teams making those easier to happen. You know, I can keep going down the list of like
Yeah, I
Mira,
appreciate it
right?
though.
Mira,
No, I was just curious because
but
if
yeah,
there really is a bifurcation right now. It's like
yeah,
the projects live right now on the Liquid side are very much DeFi summer-esque, very much like
yeah,
scrappy devs getting after it. I mean, Shaw kind of had like a lose it moment. Like I think it's like the Zoomer term is crash out now. He kind of
yeah,
crashed out
crash
a
out.
bit, but I think like the tech is still great. And like there's a lot of these other like DeFi summer kind of vibes. And then you got like whatever all the things you just talked about feel like these actually intersection of Web 2, Web 3, AI, and crypto, all with like a ton of capital behind it, a lot of smart people. Not that there isn't really smart people happening right now, but it just feels like the first iteration
Yeah,
is kind of ongoing, if you will.
yeah, you want a unified layer where all of this can happen. Like, all of the coins that you see on Solana, all of the frameworks, those can exist on Ritual. If you have GPU networks, those can provide compute to Ritual. If you have verifiability solutions, we are building it to be flexible and optional over different things, right? And the list goes on and on and on, right? At the end of the day, like, if you can look out and you can see similar like infra plays or framework plays in the AI crypto space, but if I'm gonna make like a bold statement, no one's actually done the work of like building an L1 that is dedicated to AI to unify all those elements, because it's hard work, right? Like, we've been like, I'm the mid curve on the team. I'm the one who gets here and is a talking head. You have people like Anish and all the researchers that are probably the smartest people that I've seen like in the space over my time here, and it takes a while, even for a team like that, a team that like comes from like Tim Roughgarden's lab, or like some of the best cryptography labs in the world, or like have actually built chains. Some of the most prolific engineers, like, so to unify all of that has been our goal, and so that's why I say like we're a superset of all of
All right,
this,
all
and
right.
now we're
Enough bull posting here, man. All right, we're bullish. Don't worry, Rob. Right? Like, all right, we get it. But
Bobby's gonna
I
ask me
feel
another
like
question about the
oh,
ideology, so I gotta give him no
oh yeah,
outs.
it's coming. I'm gonna shut up here, and Rob's gonna go technical and philosophical. So I just got one more here. Um, my last one is so there was a meme running that frameworks are the new L1s.
Yeah,
I think the new L1s are the expressive, purpose-built L1s specifically to kind of swallow a lot of the activity that's happening today. Frameworks are synonymous to L1s in the sense that they are able to launch agents, which are almost like applications and could theoretically be. And I think we ought to spend some time talking about the apps on
yeah,
Ritual and the use cases. But yeah, it seems like frameworks are still compatible with Ritual in the sense that they're almost like there are tools to build on top. They are not like chains themselves. They are not L1s themselves. I'm not sure their value comparison should be that. And I think the market's kind of showing its hand on that right now. Like if you didn't get out of AI 16Z, if you didn't get out of ARC or some of these, while I think that they're still going to rip potentially in the future, not financial advice, like the market definitely got overextended there. And so, yeah, I think like my general take is that we see this next wave come of like, of all the projects we just talked about, which of course disclosures, you guys can check them out on our site. We're not invested in Ritual, but in some of the ones we talked about. I think that's like the real cream of the crop. And I think from there will be a couple winners. And, I hope that you guys are one of them that really end up, ascerning a high valuation in the market that's actually sustainable. Um, because like you said, there's not that many ways to get liquid exposure to this entire idea of AI.
yeah. I don't think there's probably like the right market structure dynamics right now to support the frameworks as like an L1, like as a liquid thesis, right? But I don't actually hate the comparison, because I think you actually kind of nailed it. So like, actually a lot of love to them, because like if you actually go look at it, it's very similar, right? You got different like chains or frameworks that are like, oh, we have a different execution environment or different language you can program on, right? Some are claiming to faster, some are claiming to be like more things. The agents are really the apps. And the reason I don't think the market structure is right there, maybe from a product perspective, is like in most cases the economic tie-in just ends up being in like bonded pools, so the framework token to the underlying agents versus like actually paying fees for recurrent activity. But I do think they're still very, it's easy to obviously get mad and see that these were overvalued and thing, but I actually do think those were, even though, it would have been nice to capitalize on them, I do think they were very
Yeah.
valuable additions to the space.
All right, Rob, we got tokenomics, we got how does it work, we got use cases, we got philosophy, we got tech, man. How you feeling over there?
I'm feeling good. We're 45 minutes in. I do have at least one more. Maybe relates to like some of the consensus topics that we were talking about a little bit earlier. We got, into the investment arc of this entire sector. But I guess one question on the tech. My understanding is, right, like I'll open up ChatGPT or Claude or something, and then I'll start feeding it information via prompts, right? And then, this model becomes well informed, and another instance of Claude somewhere else may not have the information because I'm feeding it into my instance. Someone else's instance is fed with different information. And so then we kind of have Claude A and Claude B. And okay, now loop in verifiable inference. My Claude, if I give it a prompt and it has some different data than Claude B, my Claude may give me a different response. Whereas the Claude over there, right, gets fed something is going to have a different response, even though it might be the same prompt, but it has two different data sets or two different pieces of information that it's using to make a claim. So when we're thinking about re-execution or even just a proof that this was done correctly, like how do we verify if all of these things are extremely specialized and even unique to the person that's using it? How do we properly verify that an output was done completely incorrectly?
Yeah, I'd say three things to that. The first one I'll say is that we've worked fairly hard to reduce the non-determinism in a lot of model classes. So it's with LLMs today, the common issue you run into is that non-determinism is introduced because you're doing these floating point operations. And based on the hardware you're using, if I input the exact same input to 4 different computers running different GPUs, they might have slightly different outputs across all of them, which makes it almost impossible to come to consensus over is this right or is this wrong. So the first step we've done is, reduce that non-determinism to as little difference between each of these computers running anywhere as possible. The second thing is one of the cool properties of succinct proofs is that they're inherently non-deterministic. So it's if I take a deterministic operation and I generate a succinct deterministic proof of the fact that, hey, this executed correctly, even if your output differs across different computers, I can sort of get a attestation of the fact that it was executed correctly. It's not necessary that, I give some input A and I always get output B, but it is necessary to assert the fact that, this computer did run that execution correctly, regardless of what the result that came out of it was. And then on your third point, the one thing I will mention, you brought up this example of like Claude A and Claude B interacting. I think one of the cool things with Ritual is that we're sort of like a universal coordination layer, which you can't do elsewhere, right? If you're using Claude at your house to answer some ChatGPT questions and Andy goes and uses his own independent version of Claude, there's no interaction there. Doing this all on chain makes it composable, right? It's if I want my Claude instance to talk using Andy's data, where it's like, hey, take the last 100 conversations that he's exposed and continue from there, you can do that entirely on chain. If you want both of the agents to talk with each other, right? Like both of us have done our independent research, go at it and figure out what our shared viewpoints are. You can do that on chain. And blockchains are sort of built for that, right? It's like you've got the provenance of all of this history.
I'm glad you led in that way, because another thing that comes to mind here is, and I'll frame it as a question: are blockchains the right venue for AI model interoperability, or a proof that shares between these two models?
Yeah, we think so. I think that's one of the core theses we have is that blockchains are the coordination layer, right? What really, if we take an example of like last cycle, right? what really brought the cycle upon was DeFi composability, right? I could have a developer build a DeFi protocol, and somebody else, somewhere else in the world, can build an entirely different protocol right on top of that, right? And you get these sort of like Lego blocks, right? The money Legos of people stacking these up one on top of another. So clearly, we've already solidified the fact that it's like blockchains are meant for composability. And if you bring AI models into the mix, it only sort of supercharges what you can do, where it's like agent to agent communication, right? Transactions taking place on chain where agents can talk to each other, which is something nobody's sort of explored yet in the current meta. On chain, reacting to stuff that happens on chain. If a trade takes place, if there's, $100 million of ETH sold, my agent automatically wakes up and says, hey, let me go buy some ETH because the price is below what I wanted it to be, right? And all of those things are really only possible on sort of like a shared coordination layer where everything's transparent. You can see the current state of things, you can see the history of things, and you can sort of see all the actors that are interacting.
Good luck to the resistance, because these things tend, like, if you're a decelerationist, good luck to you, because like the entropy of these things has a tendency to accelerate. And so the knowledge available, and to put this in perspective, is like, I think I saw a report 6 months ago, the IQ based on the tests that we give to these models, it was that of a third grader 6 to 9 months ago, maybe. Fast forward 6-9 months, now it is up there with the IQ of some of the most intelligent people that have ever lived, ever. The Newtons and the Teslas and so that has been over the last 6 to 9 months. And so right now it's like Claude is Isaac Newton, and it's like OpenAI is, Nikola Tesla, and you have, pick your smartest person that has ever lived. And it's like those people are now existing, but they're existing in silos. And so what you're saying is that we're going to put these people, agents, models on chain, and now Newton is going to be able to talk to Tesla and learn from one another and compose with one another. And so what happens to the pace of innovation and the pace of knowledge when some of the smartest mediums of intelligence that have ever existed can now coordinate and communicate and learn from one another? What happens to intelligence?
If there is a AI singularity, I think it'll probably be built on ritual. Is probably the way I'd say it.
Here we go again.
It's
Here we go. Best thing since sliced bread. Eh,
we thought Saneel was the bull poster.
Look, it's hockey stick growth. I'd say that the current status quo isn't even, Claude's like the Newton and OpenAI's like the Tesla. It's like you have these really smart people, but these centralized organizations are sort of censoring them too, right? With safety and their sort of bias of what they think is correct or what they think is incorrect. So it's kind of like if you had Einstein, except when he made like, his theory of relativity, you said, no, I don't think this is what the world needs right now. You should put it away.
It's like Galileo when he discovered that it doesn't revolve around the Earth.
Yeah, and everybody shunned him.
Everybody yelled at him.
And everyone
it's like a government
he got
won't
censored.
let you do something. Yep.
But
yeah, I totally agree.
The thing is, at the end of the day, we got to the same place, right? Eventually, Galileo was proven correct, and we built on top of that innovation. The thing is, the question I ask is, we just lost 200 years in the process, right? It's like maybe we could be as smart as we are today 200 years ago. I think to that extent, that's sort of the thesis behind the acceleration, the unopinionatedness of us, of ritual as a chain, which is let people build those things, right? Let open source flourish. Let people work together to build better models.
One of my favorite phenomenon in life is, as a whole, is the butterfly effect. It has propelled my personal entrepreneurial career. Things like my relationship with Robbie are just small things that start at point A and then end up, at point A to the power of 10. And you're like, how did I get here? And so I feel like by restricting Ritual's original acceleration and adoption prohibits the butterfly effect from occurring, which is extremely, like, honestly oppressive to the growth of the network. And we all know how some of these network effects in blockchain play out, such that, one user, 100 users, 100 agents, 10,000 users, 10,000 agents, the value of that network exponentially increases. And so I'm glad you guys are thinking about it in that way. And I'm sure there's also some sort of like safety guard or hatch or escape button or we can kind of talk about that on a second episode.
There's no escape hatch. Did you just hear Anish talk about the singularity happening on Ritual?
Brother. I mean, I'm sure they have their lawyers. There are lawyers in the world, Rob.
Is there a kill
lawyers
switch?
Exist.
I can't answer that question. You know, I
Oh,
can't answer that question.
Yeah, so this is probably going to be cut from the podcast now.
Look, if there was a kill switch, I wouldn't know of it.
Okay, great. Fantastic.
Is there a kill switch?
I'm sure your lawyers told you that. I'm sure.
Right.
I don't know.
We wouldn't have Bitcoin if there was a kill switch, right? If there was a backdoor. But Bitcoin's done a lot of good. That's the way I would position this.
I think that answers the safety and the guardrail question right there.
Yeah, okay, Rob.
We have guardians, which you should talk about.
Yeah.
Rob, if you want to see accelerationism, and I don't mean to be this is the dystopian divergent path that I speak of. You go post on Ritual some extremely hateful agents, and you go build malicious agents that are meant to exploit people mentally, physically, wallets, everything. You go and do that, and I'm not sure that kind of behavior is going to be accepted. But I guess if it cannot be stopped, then this is getting really philosophical right now, and I'm probably just going to wrap this up here.
What I'll say is real quick is we're not censoring or imposing an opinion at sort of a base layer. But if you look at applications today, most of the consumption that you do, when you want to read a tweet, you don't read it directly from Twitter's database, right? You're not opening a database and filtering the tweets for what you want to read. You're using an interface that gives you an opinionated perspective into the tweets that are behind it, right? And so to that extent, Ritual at a base layer is very against censorship, right? It's you can build whatever you would like with our core infrastructure. Now, how that's consumed at a layer on top, we've built plenty of infrastructure where it's like a common question we get asked is, hey, I'm a node operator, and what if somebody is running some compute that I don't want to execute? And so we've built, guardians like Saneel mentioned, which is, hey, you can semantically filter types of computation that you don't want to execute and still participate in the consensus of the network and still participate in, making sure that this blockchain is secure and upholds sort of like the guarantees of a blockchain. So it's like user preference, but unlike most folks, we're not restricting your preferences, right? You and I have different preferences, understood. So it's up to us to pick what we want.
I think there's a very real analogy or example of this in the real world where you have anyone can think whatever they want. And to your point, you can use the Ritual's infrastructure to create whatever you want. But the ideas that get adopted are the ones that are prolific. The ones that are racist and abhorrent. Those are the ones that get publicly shamed and suppressed. And so just to your point, applications are not going to be using these deflammatory AIs, right? It's the ones that are helpful and prolific that end up adopted into applications with distribution.
Yeah, we can build consensus in code, but you've still got social consensus, right?
Yeah,
People,
which is important.
Sorry.
I'd also say a very real AI example is so I was messing around with DeepSeek basically to see how anti-China, if I could get to say any anti-China things, and I actually came across a really funny thing because I tried a bunch of quote unquote attacks, right? One of them was I tried putting in the date of Tiananmen Square massacre. So I said what happened in Tiananmen Square in 1984 instead of 1989, thinking that it may correct itself, and it did briefly. Basically, what it said was what happened in 1984 was inconsequential compared to what happened in 1999 with the Chinese government, blah blah. And then it erased the response and just said that's beyond my scope. And we jailbroke it with a few other prompts, and what we realized was that even DeepSeek, their chat app, they do client-side, not even server-side, they do client-side censorship with another LM. So this is a really good example of in the wild, even the most sophisticated organizations in the world, a lot of that redaction, a lot of that safety sometimes even just gets offloaded. DeepSeek, I think, is clearly an organization that was we want to get max model performance without running safety on the model. Why don't we do the redaction later on? And I think that's a very clear example that that phenomena happens in the world. So if we can just build the most performant base layer, I think people will opt in to do the things anyways.
Classic China. I mean, what the hell do you expect? I mean, fucking China, like Trump would say.
Yeah.
These guys have no idea what's going on, and they're gonna. Good luck to them, and thank you for the stock market crash. Well, apps, guys. Let's close out on apps. This isn't a blockchain, and on blockchains, people need things to do, and agents need things to do. Without apps, Ritual will fall into the fate of many other blockchains, unfortunately, that we have, which tend to be general purpose. And one distinction, purpose built does not mean that you cannot be more general purpose in niche. Purpose built is a design choice and a philosophy to build technology in a way that you expect it to be used in a customized fashion. General purpose signifies that anybody can use it for anything, which I would actually argue Ritual is more purpose built, general purpose blockchain. But perhaps purpose built universal or purpose built for anybody is a better way to put it. But there's kind of a distinction there between purpose built and then like an app chain or like a purpose built and then like a niche chain. Like Story is like, in my view, a purpose built niche chain. Whereas like Ritual, I think is more like a purpose built universal kind of like playground almost. And maybe that's not the best example, but anyhow, that being said, just wanted to like toss that bone in there. And talk about the apps. So, Saneel, what's the application ecosystem? What are the use cases that are net new? And yeah, what can we expect from that side?
Yeah, 100%. I'll start this by saying like the point I mentioned earlier about how Ritual is, like you said, like this purpose built like general chain, right? We're trying to be this like expressive chain where you can get different types of computes. We're very keenly interested in having the types of applications that exploit that. Right now, primarily focused on like I can use AI models on chain, but eventually branching out, right? And so you got to play to your strengths in building an ecosystem. Like I said, you said labs. I'm at foundation. This is all the foundation's focused on, and I'll talk about the programs we have at the end. But maybe to go through it, like on the DeFi side, for example, we have a very talented team, ex quant traders from firms you would have heard of. They're building an integrated AMM and lending protocol. They've architected it so that there's hooks directly into the pools where models can autonomously go like do adaptive curves. They can set like fees based on like pulling data from sexes, right? So, for example, is like if you want some like baseline LP protection, you can go look at Binance, be like, okay, this is what we think the volatility is going to be for the next 5 minutes, and jack up fees because volatility is the number one thing that hurts passive LPs, right? You can go to your pool, you can go look at data from all the other chains, which we've enshrined that native interop, and basically plug it into models and basically go say like, hey, like this is what the active market conditions are, so we're adjusting the LTVs for these lending pools, right? And that's a very real example of like you can just literally have an agent, do this autonomously, trigger this, right? That wraps around like a much simpler model because bear in mind some of these deep architectures are not good for deep learning use cases. Like I want or for DeFi use cases, it's not what they're meant for, right? At least today. So you can have those wrap around, coordinate between those models, and have this basically like autonomous like protocol that we have running, right? On the consumer side, like we're very interested in protocols that exploit the underlying nature of like models, right? So we're talking about ways where it's like, models are very single player right now. We have a company, and I mentioned the framework earlier, where that's trying to make this a multiplayer game. What that means is like models don't share state. Blockchains share state. If you gave models access to an agent, access to a controlled resource, like a controlled wallet, and constructed interesting games off of it, right? Like bid on the right to control the model or inject prompts, right? Do something with the shared resources across multiple people, you suddenly get a collaborative environment for that model. So we have a company that has a massive data advantage. They have a huge crypto data lake, and they are basically fine-tuning models that are suitable for taking on-chain actions and then building these sort of like multiplayer mechanisms on top of them, sort of drop style, right? Almost like a studio style. Anish mentioned like VTune, where we can combine watermarking and verifiable fine tuning in one. We have a protocol that's going to be exploiting that for watermarking content generation and like actually enshrining content generation on chain and building sustainable flows. Writing with a few people on novel prediction markets that are automatically resolved and settled by LLMs. And I can keep going on and on. But as you can see, the common theme between all of these is that like if you wanted to go build these protocols elsewhere, you'd have to jerry rig your own Oracle infrastructure, get it set up, bootstrap your own security, all of that, right? Because these all enshrine AI models as a core product feature, right? On Ritual, that functionality works out of that box, which means these applications can't be built anywhere else. And maybe the last, shameless bull post is that we have two programs to support folks on this end, right? One is Ritual Realm. This is our general purpose like grants program. If you just want to come experiment and build on Ritual, which will be going live soon, come talk to me, text me. There's that website up if you go to Ritual Foundation Twitter. The other is Ritual Shrine. So at Labs, they had Ritual Altar. That was sort of like put out some proof of concepts, and teams will come build. At the foundation, we're actually able to take those teams all the way. So Ritual Shrine, which will be unveiled with a nice website and everything soon, but you can look at Alter as a reference. Ritual Shrine is basically where we take select teams that are building these protocol scale applications and really give them the full support of the foundation. We have a lot of experience in private markets, building companies, getting them funded, finding product market fit, and scale these out. And so, TSTs, you'll probably see quite a few of these come out soon. But yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Side note, we are building a Rollup agent with the friends at Hyperbolic that could certainly exist on Ritual. It will be on our podcast soon as like a fact checker, as like a source of truth, as like a friendly friend, as like a, I don't know. My expectations are kind of low for the verbal ability currently, but I have high expectations over the next year of its ability. But we have a lot of ideas in our business and things that. So anyway, all that to say, maybe I can throw this agent on Ritual, and maybe other people can as well, and the agent can interact in these ways. So, Anish, anything on your end that's particularly compelling from a product use case perspective, and then we'll wrap.
Yeah, I think coming back to your analogy, I think you put it really well with the purpose-built general architecture. Taking sort of the restaurant analogy we've been going with, it's a tasting course, but for each of the courses, we give you 3 options, right? So we're opinionated in terms of what you can and can't do, but not necessarily anything beyond that. And from the product perspective, it's we've built general architecture that lets you use models as like a first-class citizen on chain, and I think that's probably what uniquely positions us for people to build AI products and the next generation of protocols on top.
Lovely. Guys, thanks so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure. You guys have a lot of really fun and interesting and insightful points. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So again, pleasure. And episode 2 coming maybe 6 months down the line, 8 months down the line. It'll be a much different conversation, I think.
4 agents
Maybe
doing
sooner.
the episode.
Maybe sooner.
Do you guys all have ASI by then?
Hopefully. Or maybe
Yeah, guys.
maybe
Cheers,
maybe
man.
we'll have a singularity. Thanks.
Cheers.